Hello and welcome to a quick and dirty guide to City of Threads, one of the new War Within dungeons coming to Season 1 in Mythic Plus. The goal of this guide is to go over the important mechanics and strategies for the trash and boss in this dungeon so that you can succeed from day one. So let's get into it. Right from the start, I want to talk about the class or profession buff for this dungeon. If a rogue, priest, or engineer interacts with this hologram, they can give all nearby allies a damage, healing, and movement speed buff after a short delay. You don't need to start near the hologram, but you do need to be next to it when the cast finishes to get the buff. We ran around the first two mobs to get this buff and do a larger pull with Lust in this run. In this first pull, we'll see most of the mobs in this section of the dungeon. The Silk Binders will regularly cast Web Bolt, dealing moderate damage and slowing their target. They'll also occasionally cast Silk Binding, a channeled spell which deals damage over time and stuns their target if completed. So kick this cast or stop the channel. The Venom Blades will use Venom Strike, leaving a poison on your tank which can be dispelled. The large Swarm Guards have a frontal, Earth Shatter, which does heavy damage and knocks back any player's hit. They'll also cast Ravenous Swarm, applying a large dot to everyone in the party. You can also see another hologram buff ahead of the pack right here. In the top corner, I've marked where all the holograms in this area are, and routing to them for the buff can speed up your run. The last unique mob in this area is the Herald of Ansurek, who will cast Twist Thoughts, which does a burst of AoE around the target and leaves a damaging void zone, but can be kicked. Their main mechanic is that they'll cast Shadow of Doubt on a player, who will be surrounded by 5 void orbs. This does decent damage over time, but notably when it expires or is dispelled, the orbs shoot out in the direction they're facing, dealing heavy damage and stunning anyone they hit. The easiest way to handle this is to have the player with the orbs stand still, as long as they aren't in immediate danger, and let the other players position themselves so they won't get hit by the orbs. While we chose to go through the middle straight to the boss, you can also route to the sides and avoid this Swarm Guard plus Herald pull, as well as pick up an extra hologram buff. Orator Krix'vizk is the first boss of the dungeon and constantly applies the debuff Chains of Oppression. This means all players need to fight the boss in melee, which makes dealing with his other mechanics trickier. The boss will regularly hit your tank with Subjugate, which is a hefty tank buster, as well as cast a frontal, Terrorize, which you'll need to dodge. The boss will also apply 2 of the same Shadows of Doubt debuff from earlier. The safest method is to let the debuffs expire after everyone has positioned properly, but it can be dispelled in an emergency. After cycling a few of these mechanics, the boss will cast Indoctrination, which deals heavy pulsing party damage and then leaves a slowly expanding void zone, which does heavy damage. The group will need to move together since they can't leave the chains to dodge this zone. For the tanks, you want to make sure you don't move the boss into an area you'll be cut off in, as you'll likely need to deal with more void zones and they don't time out. Manage your space well and be careful with the orb debuffs and the boss will go down. After the Orator dies, you'll have to fight Zeph Itik to get his pheromones and safely navigate the city ahead. This mob has the Web Bolt cast from earlier, as well as Perfume Toss, placing a swirl to dodge, and Gossamer Barrage, a channeled spell placing several swirls to dodge. Getting hit by them disorients or roots you respectively. Once Zeph Itik reaches 50%, he'll go friendly, and you can start the spy portion of the dungeon. The party needs to find and defeat 4 Eyes of Ansurek through this section of the dungeon before you can move on to the second boss. The eyes are disguised as normal NPCs, but when you're near a spy, faint ghostly images will lead you to their location, and they'll be marked if you're next to them. The first spy is always immediately ahead of Zeph Itik and can actually be tagged by someone with a ranged spell. These mobs will cast Null Slam, teleporting away and going invisible. A frontal effect will reverse fill towards their location before going off. They'll also cast Void Rush, applying a dot to several players in the party. Once you have the pheromones and have defeated the first eye, you can make your way into the city to find the rest. Watch out as you travel, since being caught by one of the guards, indicated by the dotted circles of detection, will make them deal heavy, potentially lethal damage to you, and teleport you back to the bridge at the start. When you find an eye, they'll spawn a few other mobs with them. The Pursuer will cast Knife Throw at a random target, dealing moderate damage over time, while the Marauder does rigorous jab, ramping up tank damage as they live. The eyes only have a few spawn points, and I've indicated them on the map, with each color being the 3 spawn points for each eye. While most of them are outside, 2 are inside buildings. When you're in the right section, use the ghost to figure out which is the right one. Additionally, there is a weak aura that will mark the eyes when you hover over their model, though it may not work for the entire season. I've linked it in the description. The eyes may also spawn with a Webmancer, which will cast Grimweave Blast, a chain lightning effect, and Mending Web, a large heal over time. You'll want to kick both. After all eyes have been defeated, you need to run to Executor Nizrek, marked by the silver icon on the map, to start a long RP to activate the boss. I've found that defeating the eyes in the order of blue, green, yellow is best, as it puts you right next to the Executor when you defeat the final eye. Once the RP completes, the second boss will be active and you can fight Nyx and Vix. In Phase 1, Vix will frequently cast Knife Throw, dealing moderate damage and leaving a dot behind on a single target, while Nyx will cast Shade Slash, avoid frontal, which leaves behind a marker, which will replicate his other abilities. He'll also cast Dustbringer, which pulses moderate party damage and creates a void circle at his location and each marker. At the same time, Vix will cast Ice Sickles, dealing a large burst of damage to everyone except the tank and leaving a dot. This overlap can be dangerous, so it's a good time to use defensives or healer cooldowns. Once bosses reach 100 energy, they'll go into their intermission and cast Synergic Step. Both bosses will target one player and dash along a path, dealing damage to anyone in their path, so be ready to dodge. After 3 dashes, they'll teleport to the center of the area and go into Phase 2. In Phase 2, Nyx will be the one casting Knife Throw instead of his frontal, while Vix will cast Rime Dagger, a solid tank hit which puts a large dot with 10 stacks on them. Any party member standing within the circle around the tank will take light damage and remove a stack, so you want to stack up to clear the debuff quickly. Nyx will also cast Dustbringer in this phase, so be careful with dodging the circles and still helping your tank out with the debuff. When the bosses reach 100 energy again, they'll go into the Synergic Step intermission and go back to Phase 1. Rinse and repeat until the boss is dead. Most of the trash after the second boss is similar to the mobs you fought in the Spy section. You'll find Pursuers, Marauders, and Webmancers again, as well as Sureki Conscripts, which apply a stacking damage taken increase on the tank. Pulling too many conscripts can quickly kill tanks, but the rest of the party doesn't have much to deal with, so help out your tank with kiting if needed. As you head up the stairs, you'll find the Royal Venom Shell, who has the same frontal as the Swarm Guards from the start of the dungeon. He'll also cast Venomous Spray, which applies a poison to all players and spawns several swirls to dodge. If you can cleanse the poison, the damage is entirely avoidable. Making your way inside the Transformatory, you'll find the Unstable Test Subject and Sureki Unnaturalers. The Test Subject will cast Dark Barrage, creating several swirls to dodge, while the Unnaturalers cast Void Wave, which knocks players back and deals light damage, but leaves a stacking dot, so try to kick or control their casts if you can. The Test Subject will also eventually cast Fierce Stomping, which does heavy pulsing party damage, and you should use a defensive. The Assistant Unnaturalers and Congealed Droplets are just tank damage, and can be safely ignored. Once all the Congealed Droplets are dead, the third boss spawns in the middle of the room. The Coaglamation is a simple boss who will regularly cast Viscous Darkness, knocking players back and dealing damage while spawning several orbs around the room which move towards the boss. An orb hitting the boss heals him for 7% of his max HP, so you'll want to intercept them, which applies a healing absorb and leaves a void zone on the ground. When he reaches 100 energy, he'll cast Dark Pulse, dealing heavy pulsing party damage, so be ready for defensives or healer cooldowns. Throughout the fight, he'll also cast Oozing Smash on the tank, reducing healing received, so be careful if you are low health and have the debuff. Once the Coaglamation is dead, there's only a few mobs before the next and final boss. When you make your way into the final room, a short RP will start, before the boss converts 2 NPCs into 2 mini-bosses. The Elder Shadeweaver casts Web Bolt and will occasionally cast Umbral Weave, dealing heavy damage and rooting all targets until the webs are destroyed. You'll want to be in melee to cleave these webs efficiently. The second mini-boss is the Hulking Warshell, who has the Ravenous Swarm from earlier in the dungeon, and will also smash the ground around them with Tremor Slam, dealing massive damage in melee and heavy party damage outside the zone. This also spawns several scarabs, which the tank should pick up. After defeating the mini-bosses, the boss will spawn. When you pull ISO, they will cast Shifting Anomalies, spawning 3 Void Orbs around their location. Running into an orb deals massive damage, and throughout the fight, these will move, with their end destination marked by a swirl. Since there is no indicator which orb is moving, an easy way to handle this is to stack up as a party and move in a circle. When the orbs start to move, you just shift along the edge of the room, and they'll all end behind the boss. The boss will also cast the 2 unique spells from the mini-bosses, Umbral Weave and Tremor Slam. Like before, stack up for the Umbral Weave, as you'll want to cleave the webs quickly, since being rooted while the orbs are moving can easily kill someone. When the boss casts Tremor Slam, be ready to dodge, and when the scarabs spawn now, they'll be ravenous and stack a buff when they melee their target. If the scarabs reach 5 stacks, they'll erupt, applying a dot and stunning targets nearby. After casting both special abilities, the boss will pull the orbs into them and throw them at the tank, dealing heavy damage to them and anyone nearby, so make sure you spread out of your stack until it's finished. Then the boss will spawn 3 more orbs and continue the fight. One last mechanic is that weaves between special abilities and the tank buster, the boss will cast Splice, adding on to the healing requirement. Thank you for watching this dungeon guide, and I hope you found it helpful. I've linked the spy marking WeakAura and the general dungeon WeakAura I'm using, which has text-to-speech callouts for most important mechanics in the description. Please like and share the video and subscribe for more future dungeon content.